I am Julio Linares. I am an anthropologist from Guatemala, and I have served the Basic Income Earth Network since around 2018 as public outreach. So my work is a lot about creating awareness and networks about basic income in different countries, in different regions. I also have made pilots of basic income. So, for example, in the tech world, I made a basic income pilot using cryptography with a project called Circles UBI back in the day. So yeah, now like more recently, I made a different company called Poetic Technologies, where we do privacy, payments, and security systems. I think Poetic Technologies was born out of a research question of how do we do digital payments in a way that preserve people's privacy. So today, when you pay online, you mostly are using Visa and MasterCard, whatever kind of debit credit cards that reveal your data, use your data, exploit your data, and make money out of your data. So, what is the equivalent of cash in the digital world, where cash is actually defending your privacy? It's autonomous, you have it, you own it, So it's a question I think a lot about because of my work in basic income, because if you give out a basic income that is unconditionally to people, but then it doesn't have privacy, then it can be exploited by actors with power, the issuers, banks, states, and so on. So how do we make sure that we can have some sort of digital system of payments or money where people's autonomy and privacy can be kept? Which is, of course, not a problem I invented. Has a long history. This is David Chaum, for example, and many other giants. What is the difference between cyberpunk today and 1993? I think being a punk is a lot about not caring about what other people think. So I think a cyberpunk would be someone who just lives as if they were already free using technology. So imagining new forms of technology, creating new forms of technology, implementing them, sort of, expanding the imagination of what is possible with technology. That's what I would imagine to be a cyberpunk. Now, I was born in 1982, so I was one when 1993 happened, so I don't know how it was back in the day. I know it was probably more, I guess, I know that a lot of the people that wrote a lot of the like the manifestos early on were influential, very theoretical. I think now we're really living through a lot of the implications of the technologies that have been invented since the 80s and 90s. So it's interesting to look back and think, okay, what are the ideologies, what are the practices that these technologies have mediated or enabled? So yeah, it's an interesting question. I have worked in the blockchain world for a while, and at the beginning, I really believed in this promise of censorship resistance. Well, at some point, I remember the blockchain that we had made circles on was bought out. So I thought, wow, if you can buy a blockchain, then what's the point? How do you actually make infrastructures that are not enclosable or buyable, basically? So I am a bit doubtful about how activists can use blockchains in that way, unless it's really for the purposes of like archival research, storing data in a distributed way, things like that. But for money, I am more and more doubtful that blockchains can serve emancipatory purposes. With cryptography, I am more hopeful because I see lots of very interesting hackers and people trying to make progress with things like zero knowledge proofs,
Nice.
even hardware. So, for example, like it's funny how these things work because of this work on like offline payments and so on. I stumble upon the history of how quantum cryptography was sort of invented, and it was actually through a paper written by a guy called Steven Wisner. What it was called conjugate encoding, where in it he lays out the foundations of what a quantum money system will be like, but it was never published. It was like 14 years in a desk somewhere, until like some of his mates got together, talked about it, and then released a paper that became the foundation of quantum cryptography. And later led to like some other developments in like security, physical unclonable functions, etc. So I feel like there is this weird genealogy to cryptography in terms of like how, you know, what someone invents then later has unintended consequences, and also often cyclical ones, and it's quite a magical thing in some ways. Um, but I guess where I was going with this is that I do think that there is power in cryptography, and especially if it's put at the hands of everyday people. Like I mentioned in my talk, like I believe PIX as a system, or mBridge, which is something that China is using. They leverage cryptography to make new payment systems that are actually publicly owned, which is, I think, better than what I see in the ecosystem largely. When it comes to the monopolies that exist today in technology and these oligopolies, the way I think about decolonization is really in terms of abolition. So we first have to dismantle these oppressive forms of technology and regimes if we want to also build alternatives to them. So it's not just about, you know, making something else or something alternative, but really trying to tackle them from within and say why, you know, how do they work, and how could we take them apart so that there is a space to make them, so that the alternatives can flourish. I think about things like Palantir. I think about even things like manufacturing of silicon chips. You know, it's a huge monopoly of also knowledge and power, and there's all this geopolitics involved. So I think we're getting to this point in the world where we really need to think about planetary politics and the ways in which we produce vital things, or things that have become vital, and how to share them across borders, both the knowledge and the practice of production. Because if they keep being oligopolies or monopolies, it's just going to end up benefiting a few people, and nothing's going to really change in the world. I'm actually quite shy about talking about these things. Like, I don't want to reveal to people what I use. But I guess one interesting one that some friends of mine in Berlin are using is called Simplex, which is a chat. I don't know if you heard about Simplex, but it's like, you know, what people really wanted when they heard Signal was a thing. So it's actually decentralized. You have a lot more privacy guarantees than with Signal. And it's just nice to use, you know. Not many people use it. So there needs to be like more community involvement and so on. But definitely Simplex is one up and coming one that I think is really cool. I mean, I also use Graphene on one of my devices, and like the containers within it, all the sort of Tor related apps that are used there are really nice. What else? I mean, of course, Tor in general, always. I think I'm more and more interested in like peer-to-peer technology and like the relationship between cryptography and peer-to-peer, because I think there's a lot of interesting intersections there for the future of the internet as well that we have to really think about. Because, you know, as climate collapse grows, there will be a need to move beyond the hegemonic internet and move towards offline ways of communicating with each other through Bluetooth, through radio, through you know, whatever media we can imagine. So that, of course, has to have some sort of privacy in it. So that is kind of what when I think about these questions of privacy as well, and which technologies and so on. Okay, so why to abolish the US dollar? I would say there are at least three reasons. One of them is that it perpetuates wealth inequality. It extracts a lot of wealth from other nations in order to keep itself alive. This happens through the petrodollar system, which is also a big cost on the earth. It perpetuates climate change through the maintenance and reinforcement of fossil fuels. So that's another big reason. And the other one is just debt, that, we're all living on US dollar debt, basically, which is a big cost on the rest of the world. So I think in order to cancel debt, be able to live within planetary boundaries and achieve economic democracy, we need to abolish the US dollar today. So I imagine a world where like communal ownership over the earth has been established and private property has been abolished. So everyone can just live according to their abilities and according to their needs. They may or may not have a basic income. If they choose not to have one, that's also fine. That gives them enough money to live. If money still exists by then, hopefully by then we have abolished that as well. But if not, maybe 20 years, we might still need a UBI, where that money of the UBI comes from this wealth held in common by everyone on earth, where, money is no longer issued by banks and states, but by people in democratic assemblies, where they decide where those credits go for which kinds of production, and also how to cancel debt. I believe that these powers have to be democratized, and so in my future utopia, I would imagine and hope that this is how it works, where money is actually democratized at the institutional level. I imagine a pluriverse of community currencies, people using them for all sorts of things and exchange beyond the monocultures of today's state currencies. I imagine a world where people have the power to say no to relationships of domination, be it in their work, in their families, in their relationships, and they are really free to live with each other. Because, as Murray Bookchin used to say, like, we cannot change the way we relate to what we call nature. I mean, of course, we're also nature, unless we change how we relate to each other. So if we don't change the domination that humans have over each other, we cannot change how we relate to the rest of the world. So in order to do that, to change that, we need to change the economic system. And so I imagine a world where we don't have to live as if we are free, because we are already free.